the Catholic Men's Podcast, helping you find good works of literature for the Catholic gentleman. Before we start the podcast today, I just wanted to say why it's going to be about the Texas Rangers. When I was visiting my home state, I flew into Dallas Love Field, and there's always been this wonderful statue of a Texas Ranger to greet me there. But last year, 2020, when I flew in at the height of the Black Lives Matter protests and stuff going on all around America, this statue was removed. And I can't believe that Texas would kowtow to this PC mob. But ever since I saw that empty space in the airport, I vowed that I would do a podcast in homage to the Texas Rangers, because they really kept law and order in Texas. So anyway, here it is. Enjoy. This is the Catholic Men's Podcast, helping you find good works of literature for the Catholic gentleman. Tonight I'm joined by Mr. Joseph Gensens. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
So this episode's going to be about the Texas Rangers. And last time I recorded with Mr. Gensens, we read about the Mad Trapper of Rat River. And I think I'm going to do the American equivalent of that, where we caught a big criminal, actually two big criminals, Bonnie and Clyde.
Oh, wow.
So for those who didn't know, the Mad Trapper of Rat River, he was this crazy man that lived up in Canada, and the Mounties had to go hunt him down. The American form of the Mounties are the Texas Rangers. But before we begin, do you want some whiskey?
Sure.
You old enough to drink?
Yes.
I got some Lafroig here.
That's good.
That's good? Okay.
Excellent.
What do you think?
Wow. Strong.
It's pretty strong.
Pretty strong.
I think we can begin. You ready?
Ready.
Okay. So, The Tales of the Texas Rangers by Ron Sudalter. Introduction. The Texas Rangers played pivotal roles in some of the most daring adventures on the Texas frontier, confronting raiding Comanche and fending off Mexican border bandits. Later, they were just as influential in capturing the post-Civil War outlaws wreaking havoc on trains and banks. The following vignettes are a sampling of some of the Rangers' most memorable and recognizable apprehensions, but a mere drop in the bucket in comparison to the long list of accomplishments the famous service has to its credit. Each of the following stories represents different foes and eras in the Texas Rangers' early history, expertly crafted by historian Ron Sudalter. I had been intending to do this podcast for quite some time, so I started to read this a couple times, but I actually haven't read the whole story before. So the first one's about Bonnie and Clyde. Do you know who Bonnie and Clyde were, more or less?
I've heard the names, but I have no clue.
So this story is called Going Down Together. Bonnie and Clyde meet Frank Hamer. Someday they'll go down together, and they'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde. That's a quote from Bonnie Parker. Looked at objectively, there was little in their personalities or talents to suggest celebrity status, except perhaps their total disregard for the law and their willingness to kill without compunction. Yet, in an age in which radio and newspapers bugled the deeds of such latter-day Western outlaws as Charles Arthur Pretty Boy Floyd, ever heard of him before? Pretty Boy Floyd?
No. Wow.
These are just a bunch of popular gangsters. Lester Babyface Nelson, and the charming but deadly John Dillinger. Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker were unquestionably America's evil sweethearts. It was the Great Depression, and Americans desperately sought diversion from the dismal realities of daily life. The imaginations of many were captured by the exploits of this attractive young couple who defied the system and lived fast and free. In reality, they were nothing more than small-time thieves and murderers. So they were depicted as kind of Robin Hood characters, but it's not true at all. Clyde Champion Barrow was born in Tellico, Texas in 1909 to a large family of poor tenant farmers. Before Clyde reached his teens, his parents moved the family to the rough neighborhood of West Dallas. Before long, Clyde and big brother Marvin were on the police radar for stealing everything from turkeys to cars. Clyde met Bonnie Parker at a friend's house, and they were mutually smitten. However, within 2 weeks, Clyde was sentenced to 2 years in prison, and, after an unsuccessful escape attempt, received another 14 years. What are some big Canadian outlaws other than the Mad Trapper?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah,
it's funny. I'm more like remember like the great heroes, the great Mounties like Sam Steele. But it's funny you don't remember like the criminals they
caught. The criminals, yeah. For some reason in this era, they were really pushed as heroes. It was a very strange thing, and the response to that were the FBI. That's where we came up with the term G-men, and then the Texas Rangers in this case. This is one of the biggest stories of when they brought them down because they were really evil. Paroled early after removing 2 toes with an axe to avoid work detail, Clyde, along with Bonnie and an ever-changing group of friends, conducted a series of petty break-ins and robberies. Then, in April 1932, they killed a general store owner during a robbery. That's what you never hear about, that they killed innocent people. Clyde went on the run, this time with a murder charge hanging over him. Bonnie Parker was born in Rowena, Texas, and apparently had a quick mind and a talent for poetry. Apparently she was really short and really slight. She quit school, however, to marry, unhappily, a minor criminal named Roy Thornton. By the time Bonnie met Clyde, Thornton was in jail serving a 5-year sentence. The tiny blonde never looked back. Faced with the choice of returning to a normal life or joining her boyfriend on the Dodge, Bonnie cast her lot with Clyde. From 1932 to 1934, they crisscrossed the West, robbing banks, stores, and gas stations, kidnapping prominent citizens, and taking lives. Kidnapping prominent citizens? I'd never heard that before. During their desperate run, they killed some 13 people, including several law enforcement officers. State and local police failed repeatedly to apprehend the lethal couple, as did J. Edgar Hoover's much-touted United States Bureau of Investigation, soon to be renamed the Federal Bureau of Investigation, so the FBI. Yeah. Finally, a lifelong Texas lawman joined the hunt. His name was Frank Hamer, and from the moment he picked up the scent, the young couple's days were numbered. Born in Fairview, Texas in March 1884, Francis Augustus Hamer, grew up as a working cowboy on a Pecos County ranch. When, at 21, he captured a horse thief, the local sheriff recommended him for service in the Texas Rangers. See, I've never read about him. I've never known his story. Hamer enlisted in Captain John Rogers' Company C, patrolling the volatile South Texas border. After a hiatus, during which time he served as marshal of rough-and-tumble Navasota, Hamer rejoined the Rangers. An expert marksman, Hamer soon became known as a man who was quick with his gun and unhesitating in its use. Hamer became a prohibition agent and was transferred to Austin in 1921 with the rank of senior captain. For the next decade, he tamed various wide-open boom towns, bolstering his reputation for no-nonsense law enforcement, supported by the .45 caliber factory-engraved Colt Peacemaker that he called Old Lucky. So the Peacemaker is the revolver form. I have to show you a picture of it later. Yeah, it's really neat. So one thing I didn't explain, maybe why a lot of people during the Depression didn't like the banks, okay? They were in favor of criminals because, in their opinion, the banks sold out on them, and because they were robbing the banks, that they were justified, That's why a lot of these people are famous. And also because they were just miserables. Yeah,
they're bad human type that was promoted.
It was promoted, for sure.
And that's why you see the Texas Rangers were so important as a counter to that.
Right.
As a good model of somebody who practiced virtue and upheld the law,
I still remember a kid's cartoon from around this time where they were trying to convince kids that robbing banks was wrong and it wasn't fun,
Wow.
And a lot of that is from Hollywood. Hollywood did glorify, probably not right during that time, but they did glorify bank robbing, In February 1934, Bonnie and Clyde broke into a Texas prison, freeing 5 inmates and shooting 2 officers. The state offered Hamer the position of special investigator for the Texas prison system and assigned him the task of hunting down the outlaw pair. It took 3 months, but he finally ran them to ground some 8 miles outside Gibbsland in northern Louisiana. Using his considerable detective skills, Hamer determined the road the couple would be traveling and set a trap, causing Clyde to stop his car long enough to make stationary targets of him and his accomplice. Then, with the assistance of several law officers, he ended their careers and lives in a fusillade of gunfire. And I think they had all sorts of weapons. They had BARs, they had shotguns, they had Thompsons. That was the only way to stop them. Again, I saw the car in a museum, and it was just full of holes. Congress awarded Frank Hamer a special commendation for his part in bringing Bonnie and Clyde to justice. He later served as a special agent for the oil companies, and briefly in 1948 as a Texas Ranger once again. The following year, he retired from a career in which he had participated in numerous gunfights, suffered several wounds, and according to the Texas State Historical Association, killed an undetermined number of felons. At least one volume on Texas Ranger history quotes Hamer's deathbed comment to his son, "I've killed 52 men and 1 woman, and I go to sleep every night knowing I did right." That's great. You know?
That's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. He is, I think it was more than a decade. He was a Texas Ranger, It's a life well spent. So this is the next story. Yonder comes 1,000 Indians, Jack Hayes and the Battle of Walker's Creek. In early June 1844, Comanche chief Yellow Wolf and his band had been raiding into Bexar County, and Texas Ranger Captain John Coffee Jack Hayes led his small company out of their San Antonio station to put an end to the Comanche depredations. Yeah, the Comanches were pretty bad. In his 14-man band were such luminaries as Ben McCulloch and Samuel H. Walker, both destined to earn legendary status in the history of Texas. For his part, Jack Hayes was a walking contradiction, his slight stature and mild manner belying a brilliant strategist and a fierce fighter of indomitable resolve. Referred to by the Texas State Historical Association as the prototypical Texas Ranger, Hayes fought against Santa Anna in the 1836 Texas Revolution and had battled hostile Indians, Mexican regulars, and border bandits from the time the Rangers were merely a citizen force of undisciplined, rough-and-ready irregulars. None of his adversaries, however, surpassed the Comanche for sheer ferocity. And then there's a quote. "I saw their glittering lances, their arrows round me flew, and all my strength it left me, and all my courage too." That's a Texas Ranger traditional folk song, which I've never heard before. It's incredible. I'm Texan, but I've never heard of this story before. The Comanche were among the deadliest foes the Rangers ever faced. Known for their exceptional horsemanship, they eschewed the use of smoothbore muskets in battle, preferring to rely on their considerable skill with bow, arrow, and long lance. Indeed, a Comanche warrior could fire at least 7 well-aimed arrows in the time it took an opponent to load his single-shot rifle or pistol. This time, however, the Comanche were in for a surprise. Back in 1839, a struggling inventor sold 130 pistols to the fledgling Texas Navy. Wow. When President of the Texas Republic Sam Houston disbanded the Navy 4 years later, a far-seeing Jack Hayes scooped up the surplus order for his Rangers. From that moment, the battle for the American West was forever changed. Manufactured in Paterson, New Jersey, the new Paterson Colt featured a revolving cylinder containing 5 .36 caliber loads, each brought into immediate play by drawing back the gun's hammer. Hayes drilled his men until they became proficient with all aspects and functions of the revolutionary new handgun. Each man carried an extra cylinder and practiced rapid reloading until he could fire 10 shots in as little as 40 seconds. However, the weapon had not been tested in combat. After a fruitless week-long search that had taken them as far as the upper waters of the Pedernales River, Hayes's company turned for home. They stopped to camp along the Guadalupe River, whereupon one of the men spotted Yellow Wolf's band riding rapidly in their direction. According to legend, the ranger shouted, "Jerusalem, yonder comes 1,000 Injuns." Although the youth misjudged their number by a wide margin, there were, by varying reports, at least 40 and as many as 200 mounted braves in the war party. Hayes's men immediately saddled and prepared for a fight. The Indians, unaware that they had been observed, hid themselves in a thicket and sent out some 20 braves to lure the Texans into a trap. When it became obvious that Hayes would not be fooled, the main body emerged from cover, whooping and brandishing their deadly lances. When it became obvious that Hayes would not be fooled, the main body emerged from cover, whooping and brandishing their deadly lances. When Hayes ordered his outnumbered company forward, the Comanche took cover in a shallow ravine, hoping to force the Texians to charge. As the Indians had anticipated, Hayes charged, but within a few hundred yards of the Indians, he suddenly wheeled his men past the ravine, rode around a nearby hill, and emerged behind his confused foes. As the Rangers charged into their midst, they fired their one-shot rifles, discarded them, and drew their new Colt revolving pistols. The Indians were dumbfounded. Later, the accurate observation was made that the Texians had a shot for every finger on the hand. The Comanche launched a counterattack, which in the past would have served to overrun the tiny band of Rangers. This time, however, it failed. Hayes ordered his men into tight formation, their horses standing tail to tail to receive the charge. The terrifying sight of dozens of screaming warriors bearing down on them, brandishing bows and lances, would have panicked most men, but Hayes's company held firm, aiming and firing their 5-shooters repeatedly at point-blank range. After 15 minutes of hand-to-hand fighting, the Comanche turned to flee, whereupon Hayes ordered close pursuit, exhorting his men, "Crowd them! Powder burn them!" The Indians tried repeatedly to turn and stand in the face of the Texian charge, but they could not withstand the deadly firepower of the Rangers' pistols. After another hour of fighting, the surviving Comanche fled, leaving between 20 and 50 dead and wounded on the field. Yellow Wolf was among the slain. The Rangers had suffered 1 man killed and 4 wounded. Wow, that's insane. Most were wounded by Comanche lances. One of the more severely injured was Samuel H. Walker, who would survive to live another 3 years, only to meet a hero's death in the Mexican War. And that's the story. That's the end. Thank you so much, Mr. Gensens, for joining me.
Thank you. Wow, that was fascinating. It was neat to see the American cowboy heroes. Wow. Gives me a whole new perspective, you know?
Right, yeah. Wow. And I hope to have you back soon, okay?
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Matthew. And to one and all, Godspeed. Thank you for listening.